Jetzt seid ihr dran, jetzt sind Sie dran, jetzt können Sie gerne.
Now it's your turn. We would like to invite questions and comments from the audience for all of our panelists and especially our commissioner. Please introduce yourself when you would like to take the floor, and please don't deliver full presentations. Please keep your question short and concise, or please make short comments. We've got a roaming microphone, so please wait for the gentleman at the back of the room to take the microphone to you, because otherwise the interpreter will not be able to hear you. There is a comment off the mic somewhere in the room.
Hello?
There was somebody at the back of the room requesting the floor. We spoke about social integration at European level. Oh, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Hermann Böhmer. I used to work at Dortmund University of Technology, and I'm a member of the European Memorandum Group. I have just one question, and that relates to regional integration and regional cohesion. We have been on the decline over the past years. Regional cohesion has not really improved over the past years in view of the crisis. What can we do to revert this trend and once again boost regional cohesion and integration? There's a lady at the front requesting the floor. I have 4 questions. We are a committee of immigrants. We actually wanted to call us the voice of the Roma people, but it was very difficult to make ourselves heard. And this is why we now call ourselves voice of the immigrants. It was very difficult to get an immigration to this event here, Commissioner, and fortunately we got one at the end, but it was very difficult to get this invitation. We support the concept you wrote. And you said in a concept that there needs to be a constant dialogue with the Roma people. And we have now set up an organization in 2013. And I'm talking about Roma people in Bulgaria and Romania. Many of our fellow citizens, many of the Roma are illiterate. Sometimes they cause problems, of course, and we can see that many of our children are excluded. This is why we've used our own money to set up a private school for 300 children. We wanted to send a clear message to the German state saying, here we are, we've got our own organization, we would like to make efforts. We have set up our own programs, customized programs for the Roma people, and we've invited the German government to cooperate with our organization. We are here for the first time today. We've been invited to come here after many closed doors that we smacked into. We wanted to come to Duisburg, but we were not invited. We have been trying to get an appointment with the integration minister for 1 year, and we could never get an appointment. We are a committee of immigrants from Romania and Bulgaria. We want to cooperate with the German authorities, but no one is prepared to listen. I send letters. I explained our situation. I've described our organization. We've got a website. We've come here today because we've been longing to meet you, because we need people who are willing to listen to us. I would have liked to meet the minister today, and I just wanted to speak up on behalf of the immigrants today. There have been reports about our organization in the media, but nobody is prepared to talk to us. I've got so many things to say, so many things I would like to explain, but no one is prepared to listen. We need to work hand in glove. The Germans and the Romanians and the Bulgarians, the Roma people from these countries. And I think that we can only find solutions if we work together with customized solutions. We can change the situation. We can make sure that people attend school. We can put an end to the situation because we can't face it anymore. We're really at the end of our tethers. And how long can we keep up our good work if no one is listening to us? Well, thank you very much for your call and your appeal. I'm sure that the Commissioner would like to take the floor and comment on this. Maybe we can have the gentleman first of all. And I have just taken note of all of the people who have requested the floor, but maybe we shall first of all offer the panelists the possibility to react. My name is Jens Geier. I'm a member of the European Parliament. And as we are here in Düsseldorf and close to the regional parliament here, the Landtag, of course, I have to say that there is a person having the same name here. I'm in the European Parliament and I represent a constituency from Ruhrgebiet. And sometimes I'm mixed up with my colleague here in the Landtag in the regional parliament. And maybe you got it all mixed up in the registration process, but this is just a comment. I was very privileged because I was allowed to come along to Duisburg this morning with the Secretary of State and the Commissioner, and as I'm the MEP of Duisburg in the European Parliament representing the Social Democratic Party, I know very well about the situation in this particular municipality, Duisburg. We've got instruments to combat poverty. Of course, it is true that we've got a concentration in certain cities, and we know that some of our municipalities, especially in the Ruhrgebiet, are facing enormous challenges. We've got the European Social Fund, for example, which is one instrument available. Mr. Andor, of course, is responsible for this instrument. But as an MEP, I would like to put something straight and to differentiate some things. We are talking about a multi-annual financial framework spanning the years 2014 to 2020, and the the German federal government insisted on reducing the EU budget. And at the same time, I've seen German politicians making interviews on television, rolling their eyes, saying, "Oh, it's finally high time that the European Union will reduce its budget." And this creates the impression that lots of money is being sent to Brussels, where it disappears in some dark channels. People forget about the fact that 95% of the money sent to Brussels is actually redistributed to the countries, but a euro not sent to Brussels from Berlin, of course, can't make its way back to Düsseldorf or wherever if it's first not sent to the European Union. Of course, this redistribution system, where we call it national envelope in our EU jargon. That is to say, the EU money made available to Germany under the ESF and under programs will remain more or less the same in the next 7 years. Well, the first challenge is, of course, to bring up, to raise the 50% of co-funding to match the EU funding, which might be a bit difficult in North Rhine-Westphalia. The second challenge is the financial regulation system in North Rhine-Westphalia, which says that we need to have 10% proper funding to chip in the European projects. And there are lots of municipalities in North Rhine-Westphalia that haven't got any money to spare to match the money made available from Brussels. And maybe we need to reconsider the financial regulations. So I think this is maybe at the origin of some of the problems why Duisburg, for example, can't tap into the national envelope. But the situation is as it is, and this is why it's probably very difficult to follow the proposal to rechannel any money not used in Romania and Bulgaria and use it in Germany. We would have to reconfigure the entire financial system of the European Union. Well, I would be very happy to do that, but it's probably very ambitious, and there are lots of things that we will probably have done before we will make it to that end. There is another point I would like to mention, the fact that some money is not spent. When I meet Laszlo once a year in Brussels, when we've got our committee meetings, when it's about discharging the Commission, we often say that if you can't guarantee the sound financial management in a project, you must not grant projects. That is to say, when the management capacities for sound financial management are not guaranteed and are not available in the recipient countries, the European Commission intervenes and the project money is no longer made available. This is, of course, a very difficult situation. We're caught between a rock and a hard place. You can't rechannel that money. You can't just use it somewhere else, but it's just not available anymore. If we were to tap into these 20%, which is actually sent back to the national budget, we could do some things, but this is unfortunately not possible. Hartmut Seifert. I used to work for the WSI Institute at Hans-Böckler Foundation. Commissioner Andor, you spoke about the social imbalances that are on the increase within many European member states, but you haven't really given us a lot of information how to explain this process and what are the factors that have driven this process after the crisis. Professor Ankel Hasselt has said that this is nothing that's new, that we've seen the similar phenomena in the past, but this alone doesn't explain why it now happened after the 2008 crisis. And at the same time, you could also raise the question why some countries do not show such a social discrepancy or divergence. You mentioned Austria as an example. Do you think that the particular industrial relations that you've got in Austria are one contributing factor? You've got large-scale collective agreements, for example, that protect the working conditions of workers. On the other hand, some countries have gone down the avenue of deregulating labor markets that might have fueled the imbalances. One more comment. Anke Hasselt mentioned the notion of flexicurity. The Commission was quite intent on flexicurity for years and years on end. But all of a sudden, there are no longer discussions about flexicurity. Has this concept actually failed, or have you said goodbye to this concept? What are the reasons that we no longer talk about flexicurity nowadays? My name is Norbert Fanien, and I belong to the working group European Affairs of the Social Democratic Party in North Rhine-Westphalia. I don't know whether we will really bring about convergence in Europe using social policy alone. I think that this is also something where industrial policy is very important, and the Commissioner for Regional Policy should be here today. But it's not, unfortunately. I would also like to call upon the European Trade Union Confederation here. I think that we need to have a discussion on economic policy and industrial policy. Maybe we need to think about a revitalization of our European regional policy. Maybe we need to have a kind of regionalized structural funds at European level. Maybe we should place a greater focus on the regional dimension than we currently do. One of my colleagues spoke about austerity and said that we are putting all of our money on austerity. I think that we would probably have a very different situation today but for the regional funds, which we had right from the start, which have made convergence possible and cohesion within the European Union. What is quite strange is that these funds were actually reduced. This was in the scope of the EU enlargement towards the east. Of course, we had to reduce it for a lack of money, but basically speaking, as far as the concept behind is concerned, these funds should have been increased, actually. Another question is, of course, also the one of efficiency. I'm talking about revolving funds, that is to say, funds being paid back so that we can reinvest or reuse them elsewhere. But the question is how to fund such funds or such instruments. We've already heard discussions about various such projects. You've also mentioned the question of a fiscal arrangement, a fiscal mechanism at European level. And this is, of course, one thing, but I would also like to mention tax havens. Maybe the European Union should do something to fight tax havens in order to make money available for regional development. Thank you very much. I think that these questions were of a very high quality.
Laszlo, perhaps I would give you the floor for a moment. A lot of questions are directed to the Commission and to you personally, so perhaps you can...
Okay, let me then start with the so-called Roma question, because indeed this is very much in the focus of the interest, and for the region, North Rhine-Westphalia, this is becoming also a crucial question. We knew all the time that for countries where the majority of the European Roma live, and that's Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, this is an absolutely fundamental question. What we also know, and I think there's an increasing understanding, that these countries are quite uneven in terms of Roma activity and Roma politics. You mostly hear about Romanian Roma. While all other countries which I listed also have large Roma populations, some of them, for example, Hungary, have more developed Roma politics. also better connected with national politics as such. You hardly ever hear about Roma migrating out of Hungary. You mainly hear about Roma migrating out of Romania, also because of the different national policies and a different role the Roma organization themselves can play in the implementation of the EU funds, for example. So ever since the Commission started to work on a European framework for national Roma integration strategies, we insisted that not only advocacy groups, civil society outside these countries, but also the Roma organizations themselves should play a role in designing, but also implementing the programs, and especially evaluating what is happening on the ground. And this, of course, has to be consolidated and has to be spread. The Commission itself regularly has conferences in the countries which I mentioned, but also in Brussels, in order to help developing the skills to use EU funds to compare and take over the best practices of integration experience in various countries, because experience exists, but in very small scale and not necessarily in the critical mass that would be needed to change living and working conditions. The next such Roma summit will take place on the 4th of April in Brussels, and it will focus on issues like school segregation, for example. And in some countries, and not only in Romania, but also Hungary, Slovakia, this is a real problem, and unless we can really address this and make some kind of breakthrough, of course, not only the source countries, but other countries will also face the consequences. So the involvement of Roma is important in all countries, the source countries, but also the receiving countries as well. Thanks to Jens Geier for the supplementary explanation on how the EU funds have been used and can be used. Indeed, we very often find ourselves in a difficult situation where you have to ensure two things to happen at the same time: spending and investing from EU resources, but on the other hand, preventing any type of abuse and irregularity. And to reconcile these two objectives, especially in a few countries, and I could not only mention Romania, but the Czech Republic from the recent years' experience, of course, sometimes is very, very hard. We can only hope that as these so-called new member states, some of them already EU members for 10 years, but as they gain experience and ensure that the competent staff is in the charge and the managing positions of the authorities, without too much temptation, then they will show more results with using the EU resources. But the resources have to be used in the country to which they were allocated. Technical advice, cooperation in order to boost the potential of the EU funds is always possible and always welcome. Concerning the, so to speak, the doctrine of the Commission in the area of the employment and the story with flexicurity, I agree with everyone who said that this is a very important and interesting and inspirational concept. However, we have been facing a lot of difficulties, starting with a very simple translation of the word flexicurity to all other languages, but also to reactions from the social partners, especially from the trade unions, by saying that the implementation of flexicurity has been in practice very, very uneven, saying that flexibilization was always ahead of providing more security of the employment in terms of rolling out the active labor market policy, investment in skills, modernizing social security, and so on and so forth. So it was in a way helpful for inspiration, but after some time, probably insufficiently explained what exactly needs to be done, especially at the time of the crisis, when in the crisis time, you don't simply have a need for activation measures and investment in skills, supply-side policies on the labor market, but you need to shift the attention to the demand side of the labor market, where the demand for labor had collapsed. And that's not covered by the flexicurity doctrine. So that's why I think there was a justification to kind of give a little rest time to the flexicurity doctrine. The last time we had a conference about it was November 2011. Maybe you were still in Brussels, Andy. And in the employment package of April 2012, we shifted this discourse towards the concept of the dynamic and inclusive labor markets, which also gives some homework to countries like Germany, because the German labor market is not necessarily inclusive enough, especially when you look at the gender imbalances and the disadvantaged position of women, but it helped to frame the very important labor market reforms, for example, of Italy, but also other countries. To speak about the dynamism instead of just flexibility also is better to explain that it's not only the segmentation problem which we are facing, but also the entry to some jobs and some professions, especially when it's about Italy and Greece. So you have to work on both ends. So this is the answer to the question on flexicurity, and maybe other panelists would wish to comment on others.
Vielleicht kann ich dann Rainer gleich dazu reinbringen zum Thema Flexicurity.
Excuse me, but I would like to react immediately what you said, because the concept of flexicurity as such, I think, is also, from our perspective, a quite valid one. The problem with the concept is it was entirely hijacked and became a pure concept of flexibilization, deregulation of labor markets, especially in the source. And this is the reason why trade unions have become so critical and got distant to the concept. We know that we need a modernization of labor markets which has to introduce some sort of flexicurity, especially if it comes, for example, to increase the participation rate of women in the labor markets, if it comes to the reconciliation of family life and working life. There are a number of issues we have been quite positive on. But the experience in many countries, not in the north, but because it's coming from the north mainly, the concept, has been so negative that it lost confidence by many workers and by many unions.
Then Mr. Kluge, Reider, Regional Fund, and then the call from our colleague, the NGO representatives of the Romans. I get the impression that regarding the wish for using the funds provided by the European Social Funds in the countries we concur. We have one opinion. The final target has to be, and let's come back to the public debate, and with Bulgarians and Romania, well, that in these countries the available funds should not be utilized 27 but 100%, and this should be the focus. It's not about transferring funds when they are not used, retransferring them to Germany. No, how do we manage to use it where it should be used? Well, together our goal is that jointly we would like to achieve that more of the funds are used. And then, well, regarding the target and the measures, I want to know how do we manage to get it through? It's important to find out what won't work. Well, on the one hand side, you can put pressure on the system by retransferring money, but this doesn't seem to work, and other measures don't seem to work either. But I actually want to know which means can be used in order to attain the joint target. How do we manage to have funds for combating poverty are used and requested just as successfly as in other areas? And you, as representatives of a migrant, you spoke on behalf of 4 people who are present here. I'm really grateful for your contribution, because in the morning we also talked about how we prepare children for entering schools, children who come here and do not speak any German. And I think that our Prime Minister, Hannelore Kraft, made an important statement. She said all children in this state are our North Rhine-Westphalian children. And what it should be about is how we manage, how can we succeed in offering the best possible opportunities to all the children living in North Rhine-Westphalia. The main focus of our coalition here in North Rhine-Westphalia is not to leave any child behind. I would like to invite you to exchange our contact data. After this we will have a joint talk. We will talk to each other, and I'm looking forward to that. Sorry, I cannot understand the lady because she's not using a microphone. I'm sorry. I try. Sorry, I do not want you to get into further detail. So the Undersecretary of State made a tangible offer to you, and you can arrange this later on with him. I would like to ask for your understanding, and afterwards we will have time for 2 final questions, and then we start with a final round. We started late, so I think, Anke, then two more questions. Should there be any, we can take them once they're brief. My name is Nick Wojcnet. I study social sciences, and I an auxiliary at the IHQ. I've got 2 questions. There was a lot of talk about immigration and the need for immigration, and that often, the supply and demand do not match. And we see it in many fields, and the answer is a more active labor market policy, retraining, etc. The Commissioner talked about the ESF, but when you take a look at the situation in Germany, such active labor market policy doesn't exist anymore, really. So my question to the state government, do you also see that we have to promote this and boost it and get back to a more active labor market policy that would be that would embrace a culture of welcome, training people, giving them further training? I also live in Duisburg, and I know about local policies, and you will also know more after your visit this morning. You might have seen that there are lots of good ideas. For years we've got action plan drawn up by the city, and local politicians keep saying that we've done everything, and the only thing that's lacking is money. And this is what everybody keeps saying. They call upon the EU, the state government, the national government, and when we look at the situation here, it's similar. We've got 2 representatives here, one from the EU, one from the state government. Who's the right person to talk to? You could say and agree with each other, now it's the national government, but I think it would be more the state government as a supervisory authority that would have to take care of that. But Duisburg is not the only local community faced with a problem. So who should the communities turn to for helping them and allowing them to implement their action plans? Another question, maybe a brief one, right up front. Mr. Andor, you quite rightly pointed out that the concept of flexicurity in connection with the crisis was sort of neglected and went a little bit under. I do not fully believe this. Even after the crisis, in my opinion, there was a response by means of flexicurity which occurred, and it was organized in Germany. In Germany, too, in some sectors, we had a slump of 40% in terms of orders being awarded. In some subsectors, even an 80% decline, and nonetheless, they declined to keep up the employment levels in this crisis because the response was a very specific one, which means the state, the national side came in and they expanded labor market policy, that is short working hours. At the same time, there were economic measures putting forward economic stimuli, and the measures of short time work were combined with collective agreements by strong trade unions. unions. And these collective agreements made by strong trade unions were implemented in the companies in order to secure employment even beyond the crisis. And then the sector came out more strongly after the crisis than before. And this was simply due to the fact that the response was a very specific one. What is interesting to me is that the concept of flexicurity will only work successfully if it's not based on a deregulation of the labor market, but if it's based on the concept of strong works councils and strong collective agreements and strong trade unions. And maybe, with your diagnostic capabilities, you could help me a little bit, Mr. Andor. How can you explain that this way of reacting in Germany, which is praised by everybody as a reasonable response to the crisis, could you explain to me why this response is not taken as a basis for responding to crises in other countries, and why just the opposite is being done? So a good example is being praised, but just the opposite is being done in practice. Could you explain this contradiction to me? Maybe you can help me with your diagnostic capabilities, so to speak. Thank you very much. Well, we've got a time problem, so please be short, and then we will have a final discussion. My name is Volker Halbig. I study political sciences, and I'm also have a bursary of the Hans-Böckler Foundation, and I'm also a works council in a large health company working in the health sector. I would like to talk about the Monti II regulation. For me, convergence also means that we secure free collective bargaining. 2 years ago, in spring 2012, there was the ratification of the fiscal pact. Oh, that was in 2011, indeed. And at the same time, we had the so-called Monti II regulation. There was a subsidiarity gap which stopped it, and the federal government, the national government, hadn't made any statement here. At the same time, however, the southern European countries were experiencing difficult situations. They were forced to interfere with free collective bargaining massively in their countries. The worst case scenario, I just imagine, what would have happened if we would have so massively interfered into free collective bargaining that the EU Commission would have the last word in saying whether the partners can strike or not in this particular dispute. So thank you very much for the questions. We started late, and I think we are still within our time frame set, but I would like to have a final round now. Maybe we go round the table, and then the commissioner, the way it should be, could have the last word. And I would like to ask Anke to start and to give us a summary statement, or pick up one of the questions.
And I want to make 2 points, and one has to do with the title of this conference and one with what Michael Guggemos said. We talk about back to convergence, addressing social imbalances in Europe, and I think that the title does not really describe what is happening and what will be the agenda of the next years. I think what we should really talk about is dealing with diversity. If we talk about convergence, I think we have a simplistic expectation of what will happen in Europe over the next decade or so. We now have more diversity in Europe, within the European Union, than ever before, and that has both to do with culturally, but also with socioeconomics. If we look at the diversity, we talk about wages ranging from Bulgaria to Denmark. The Danish wages, or the Danish household income, is 13 times the household income of Bulgaria, which is a huge discrepancy, which is more diverse than we had ever before. And to think that we will manage to come to a process that at some point we will have convergence on one uniform economic model in Europe, I think is not very realistic, at least not in the short and medium term, not in our lifespan. I think we have to think much more about what diversity means for Europe and how we can live within a diverse Europe in a way that it means social quality for all in all the regions. And that means different things in different places. That is just a general statement about this conference. The second is a little bit about Michael Guggemos and, why can't we export a short-time working arrangement to all other countries in the EU, and why don't we just export that to other places. And the reason for that is that in Germany, skilled labor is used in a very specific way, which is not done in many other countries. Yeah? You have it in some countries, you might have it in the Netherlands or in Austria or in Belgium, where companies use highly skilled labor and want to hold on to these skilled workers. Yeah? And because they have a vocational training system, because they invest in their workers and they know if the economy picks up, we want to keep all these workers. And therefore, companies want to have a short-term working arrangement. In many other countries, in particular in Southern Europe, this is not the case. You do not have the investment in the skills, and companies do not want to hang on to their core workforce. They say, for us, it is much better if we could fluctuate our workforce, yeah, within the economic cycle. And this is why it is so hard to transport one policy measure from one country to the next. This is also the reason why we cannot export our vocational training system to Spain. Yeah? In Spain, we have huge levels of youth unemployment. In Germany, we have very low levels. And the easiest solution is to say, why don't they introduce a vocational training system? Then they have the German system. It does not work. Because for them, the understanding what are skills and how do we use skilled labors is a very different one. Yeah? And this is sort of would be my interpretation. Why can't we just have the same policy in all the places in Europe? And that, again, leads back to the question, how do we deal with diverse units or diverse countries within the European Union?
Vielen Dank, Anke. Rainer, ich bitte dich um Schlusswort.
Ich will nochmal an einem Punkt anknüpfen, den ich glaube Norbert Fabian eingebracht hat, auch wenn ich eine gewisse Sympathie dafür habe.
If I have taken some liking to the fact that we have to talk about divergence in Europe, but nonetheless we have a political goal that is coming up and when balancing then and making the living conditions more equal, also by taking into account diversity. But what is right, it's, with the instrument of employment and social politics, this will not work on its own. And there are some central flaws within the construction design of the Euro Economic and Monetary Union. There are issues of macroeconomic policies, investment, innovation, schemes, and then there is the question of fiscal harmonization. And then in Germany, it's not an unusual thing that people think about the fact that those who caused the crisis should also be involved in the financing. So fiscal policy, making available part of one's property, because with the labor market and social policy, we will not move towards convergence. And I think that we still have a debate ahead of us where we will talk about the future of Europe and where we have to be a little bit more courageous. Thank you. I would like to use the opportunity to respond to our colleague from Duisburg and his question. Well, immigration does take place. We have it focused in some big cities and some environments there, and the local communities have got major tasks they have to tackle, and Duisburg is one of the cities most affected in Germany, and this is social tasks that has to be tackled by the entirety of the country. It's not it's for the whole society. It means that all levels are asked to come in, not only the local communities or cities or the state or the EU or whatever. Duisburg is highly committed to doing that. Prior to Christmas, the 7.5 million funding package was adopted. I do not need to repeat this, and I'm pretty satisfied to see that something is happening at a federal level. There is the program which is called a social city program. We will make headway, and the Lord Mayors and the affected cities of the rural area will get new impulse, new stimuli. And we talked about the European Social Fund, which provides then funding we make use of here in Germany and in North Rhine-Westphalia and the local communities. And we talked about the fund aid for the most deprived, and Commissioner Under, you just mentioned it in your presentation, and there we will take a very close look at how we can use it for the benefit of North Rhine-Westphalia. All levels have to cooperate, and I get the impression that we are making progress, but there is one thing I warn against. You cannot simply snap your fingers and resolve the problem overnight, so to speak. This is not an easy undertaking. It will be a lengthy process. We are willing to work in that and cooperate. All the levels have to be included.
Before the Commission has the last word, at least that was the case in Brussels always, and we'll keep this tradition up now here as you're visiting us. Laszlo, please.
Well, thanks so much. I try not to abuse my position as the last speaker in this round. But let me just connect again with the issue of Duisburg and the difficult challenges you are facing in the city. The point is that the situation is just simply disproportionate, not only in a German context, but also in a North Rhine-Westphalian context. Because the balance, the overall picture of migration is always coming from a comparison of the gains and the costs. And if there is such a geographical imbalance between the gains and the costs, as the case here, of course there is a need for a national solidarity. And this is what we also try to help to promote. 1 week ago I was in Berlin speaking with the national government, the Bundestag, encouraging to look at the big picture and also help those who receive, at least for the short term and the medium term, more costs rather than the gains out of labor mobility. And this indeed needs to be promoted. The country must be able to afford more national solidarity in order to overcome these situations and in order to ensure that in the long run we all win out of free movement. On the question of the Monti II, it's quite interesting because I would say it's quite inaccurate. What I heard, the Monti II regulation was made a part of the posting package in March 2012 because previously there was a concern following the notorious court rulings that according to the EU as such, social rights would be subordinated to fundamental economic freedoms. And the Monti II regulation simply stated that this is not true. They're not subordinated to each other. It was not about regulating the right to strike or the way to strike in the member states. And it was not withdrawn on the grounds of subsidiarity, but simply because it would have required unanimity in the Council, which was not realistic at the time. But the Commission did not agree with the concerns on the grounds of subsidiarity because the treaty has very clear provisions in this area, primary as well as secondary law. Now, concerning the issue of the Kurzarbeit and what we call the internal flexibility, I think it's an extremely helpful example because it invites a kind of comparison of the first phase of the crisis and the second one. The first phase after 2007 and 2008, when there is a global financial crisis, but not yet a European debt crisis. And the second phase, when the rest of the industrialized world, Japan, USA, already come out of the recession after 2010, but Europe, instead of that, goes back to the crisis. I think in the first phase, 2008, 9, 10, Europe performs much better than the United States, especially in terms of preserving jobs. And why is that? It is because countries have the capacity to respond with automatic stabilizers in the national context, fiscal expansion, and allowing the automatic stabilizers to function, which has an economic and a social importance alike. And also because the internal flexibility is used in a way of a shorter work time arrangement, by the way, also supported by EU funding when it was necessary, based on the strong social dialogue in countries like Germany, but also Austria should not be forgotten either. Now, we have been praising this in the employment package and indeed advocating the model. The reason it's not so much connected with the concept of the flex security, because the flex security, I agree, unfortunately, has become too much attached with the reduction of the employment protection. And this is not a reduction of the employment protection, quite the contrary. It's preserving jobs and not questioning the level of the employment protection. However, what happens in the second phase of the crisis? Instead of transferring this model, which faces limitations because many other countries, especially in the south, don't have the same level and strength of the social dialogue and don't have the same industrial structure, a Mittelstand, which also is required for this to work. However, at the same time, because of the Eurozone crisis, which we discussed, they are forced to engage in internal devaluation. And the internal devaluation is the key issue, why the contraction of the economy is taking place, why the explosion of unemployment is taking place because of the falling demand, and why the rising poverty is everywhere the case in the Eurozone periphery at this stage. So this is the period where, unfortunately, Europe performs much worse than the United States. The US in 2011 and 12 on a monthly basis produces 200, sometimes 300,000 jobs, while Europe now continues until the middle of last year losing employment. So the question is how to ensure that first of all we come out of this crisis, but secondly we make the whole system more resilient. The labor market, the social dialogue, but also the monetary architecture more resilient for the future. I agree that we have to, when it's about cross-national or cross-country comparison, we have to take as much as possible from the north, where it's the efficiency of the social systems, the social dialogue, transparency, with using EU funds, if I may mention also this, and many other ways. But we have to find an alternative to the internal devaluation what concerns restoring competitiveness in the EU in case these imbalances occur. And that brings us back to the first round when Herman as well as Norbert were asking about the importance of the regional policy and the possible connections with industrial policy. Because this is an area where I think we have probably not done enough to ensure that some kind of new combination or marriage of the EU regional and industrial policies can be more instrumental in restoring economic competitiveness on the peripheries. We have made some progress. The Commission made some openings towards a kind of 21st century industrial policy. I think we have made improvements in the regional policy too. Some very pioneering changes have been made, for example, to connect the regional investment agenda with energy efficiency and fighting climate change and shift towards sustainable growth and green jobs, which we will further explore in the spring period, but we probably have to do more, or the next Commission will have to do more in this respect if we really want to ensure that in the EMU, the capital E also has a real meaning and we have a proper economic leg of the EMU, which in my view should restore the potential for convergence. I think there is diversity and there will be diversity. But I think if the divergence means that in the monetary union, some countries are simply prohibited to restore to a decent level of economic growth with a decent speed, which also allows for preserving social cohesion, then it's not anymore diversity. Then we have a fundamental imbalance which needs to be overcome by new elements in the EMU on which we will have to work in the coming, hopefully not years, but months.
Thank you very much to all the panelists and particularly to Laszlo for their final statements. Some of you will have seen there was an interview with the commissioner on Spiegel Online recently, in which the first rather provocative question was, Mr. Commissioner, do you live in an ivory tower in Brussels? And the commissioner answered by listing all the places he's visiting in Germany, or he has visited recently, and he mentioned the visit to Duisburg and Düsseldorf. And I think of one thing at least we are convinced that this commissioner at least does not live in an ivory tower and is very familiar with the debates on the ground in all the different European countries, from Romania with the problems there to the problems here in North Rhine-Westphalia. So thank you very much, Commissioner, for coming and discussing with us.